PMP certified, yet stuck, Dawn's fight for the ultimate project. Chapter 1. The Certification Triumph. Dawn's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he took a deep breath and clicked submit on his PMP exam application. It was a moment he had been working toward for months. No, years. Nights spent hunched over a desk, his coffee machine working harder than him, and mornings waking up with his head resting on pages of study guides. Dawn wasn't just chasing a certification, he was chasing redemption. His journey to this point hadn't been smooth. He'd worked as a program coordinator at a mid-sized engineering firm, where his talents often went unnoticed. Watching others rise while he stayed stuck in a revolving door of unremarkable projects had gnawed at him. The PMP wasn't just about leveling up professionally. It was about proving to himself that he belonged in the same league as the project managers he admired. After weeks of waiting, exam day arrived. Dawn walked into the testing center with a mix of nerves and determination. It felt surreal sitting in front of the monitor, every click taking him closer to what he hoped was a better future. 4 hours later, his heart raced as the screen refreshed. "Congratulations!" The words stared back at him, glowing like a beacon. He had done it. The celebration was brief, just a quiet moment with himself and a muted fist pump. Dawn was practical. He knew the PMP was a key, not the treasure itself. The treasure lay in the opportunities it would open. Immediately, he updated his LinkedIn profile and started applying for roles, his confidence at an all-time high. The first application he sent out was to a renowned pharmaceutical company. It wasn't just any job. It was a position he had dreamed of, leading a project team working on innovative drug development. The idea of contributing to something meaningful, something that could save lives, gave him a sense of purpose. When the interview invitation came, Dawn's preparation went into overdrive. He devoured everything he could about the company, memorized their mission statement, and practiced answers to behavioral questions until his voice grew hoarse. On the day of the interview, he donned his best suit and walked into the conference room with a confident stride. The panel, consisting of 3 senior managers, grilled him on everything from risk management strategies to stakeholder engagement. One question in particular caught him off guard. "Tell us about a time when you failed to deliver a project on time and how you handled it." His mind flashed to a specific moment, a manufacturing project in his previous role that had gone horribly wrong. Supplies had been delayed, stakeholders were irate, and he'd been caught in the crossfire. Drawing from his PMP studies and personal experience, Dawn outlined how he had taken control of the chaos, restructured timelines, and communicated transparently to salvage the project. The panel seemed impressed. As he shook hands with them at the end, one of the interviewers said, "We'll be in touch soon." Dawn left with a cautious sense of optimism, replaying the interview in his mind on the drive home. Days passed, then a week. Each time his phone buzzed, his heart leaped, only to sink when it wasn't the call. Finally, an email notification lit up his screen. He opened it with bated breath. "We regret to inform you." The rejection felt like a sucker punch. He stared at the words, reading them over and over as if their meaning might change. The effort, the hope, the image he had painted of himself working in a field of life-changing impact. It all evaporated. Dawn closed his laptop and slumped back into his chair, the euphoria of his PMP certification now a distant memory. But he wasn't ready to quit. Not yet. He reminded himself of something he'd read during his preparation. Success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. That night, he poured himself another cup of coffee and got back to the grind, determined to make his next application count. Chapter 2. Hospitality. Hopes dashed. Dawn scrolled through job postings, his resolve still intact despite the sting of his first rejection. His eyes landed on a position with a prestigious hotel chain, a name synonymous with luxury and innovation. The role promised an opportunity to manage high-profile projects, from event planning to grand-scale renovations. Daun pictured himself overseeing the launch of a glamorous new wing, the kind of project that could transform his career. It wasn't his usual industry, but Daun knew project management was transferable. He crafted a tailored cover letter, weaving in stories of his experience managing budgets, juggling stakeholders, and applying risk management principles from his PMP training. He emphasized his ability to adapt to new environments, a skill honed during his time as a project coordinator. Within days, the hotel's HR team reached out. The interview was scheduled at their downtown headquarters, a building as opulent as the brand itself. As Daun entered the gleaming lobby, he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. He had made it this far, and he was determined not to let this opportunity slip through his fingers. The recruiter, a sharp-dressed woman named Emilia, ushered him into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The setting was intimidating, but Daun focused on the conversation. Emilia started with the usual questions. Why do you want to work here? What makes you the ideal candidate? Daun answered with a mix of professionalism and enthusiasm, drawing on his PMP studies and his knack for adapting to challenges. When the conversation turned to his hypothetical handling of a delayed project for a high-profile client, he confidently outlined a plan. He spoke of communication cadences, stakeholder management, and escalation paths, feeling the familiar rhythm of project management logic. Emilia seemed impressed. You're clearly passionate about project management, she said with a smile. We'll be in touch soon. The interview had gone well. Better than well, Daun thought. As he rode the elevator down, he allowed himself to daydream. He could almost see himself working here, overseeing elegant ballrooms, coordinating with top-tier architects, and making an impact. A week passed, then two. The confidence he had felt leaving the interview began to waver. One evening, as Daun was preparing dinner, his phone buzzed with a notification. The sender was unmistakable. Emilia from Grand Lux Hotels. Daun's hands shook as he opened the email. Dear Daun, thank you for interviewing with us. After careful consideration. His heart sank as he read the next line. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. The words hit harder than the first rejection. This time, it wasn't just about a missed opportunity. It was about a dream crumbling before it had even begun. Daun slumped into his chair, staring blankly at the screen. His mind replayed the interview, searching for a mistake, a missed cue, something that explained why he wasn't chosen. That night, he reached out to a mentor he had met during his PMP preparation course. What am I doing wrong? Daun asked, his frustration palpable. You're not doing anything wrong, the mentor replied, but don't underestimate the process. Each rejection is a lesson. Did you follow up with them? I didn't think it would matter, Daun admitted. It always matters, the mentor said. Send them a thank you email. Ask for feedback. Show them you're committed, even if it's after the fact. It leaves an impression. Daun took the advice to heart, composing a polite email to Emilia that night. While he didn't expect a reply, the act of writing it felt like reclaiming a small piece of control. Still, the sting of failure lingered. Was his PMP certification worth it? Was he worth it? As self-doubt loomed, Daun made a promise to himself. This wouldn't be the end. The next application, the next interview, he would go harder, smarter, and more determined than ever. His dream wasn't dead. It was just waiting for him to catch up. Top of form. Chapter 3. Engineering a New Plan. Daun wasn't one to wallow in self-pity. After 2 rejections, he felt the frustration, but also a deeper resolve. If the pharmaceutical and hospitality industries weren't meant to be, perhaps his next step was to return to more familiar ground: engineering. Dawn found a posting for a project manager role at a reputable engineering firm that specialized in large-scale infrastructure projects. It felt like destiny, a chance to put his certification to work in a field where he already had some footing. This time, he prepared with military precision. Dawn combed through the firm's recent projects, memorized their mission statement, and even researched the interview panel through LinkedIn. He rehearsed answers to every possible question, from budget overruns to stakeholder conflicts. His notes were meticulously organized, a reflection of the disciplined project manager he aspired to be. The interview day arrived and Dawn felt ready. The firm's office was a sleek, modern building with high ceilings and buzzing energy. As he sat in the waiting room, he reviewed his talking points one last time, steadying his nerves. The interview panel consisted of 3 seasoned professionals, a project director with decades of experience, a young and sharp HR representative, and a senior engineer who looked like he had spent more time on job sites than in boardrooms. They started with technical questions about project scope and risk mitigation. Dawn's PMP training served him well. He delivered answers with confidence, weaving in real-world examples from his previous roles. Then came a curveball. The project director leaned forward, his steely gaze fixed on Dawn. Let's say you're managing a bridge construction project. Halfway through, you realize the design is flawed and the materials ordered won't meet specifications. What do you do? Dawn took a deep breath. He outlined a step-by-step response, initiating a design review, conducting an impact analysis, communicating transparently with stakeholders, and proposing alternative solutions. As he spoke, he could see the panel nodding, the senior engineer even giving a faint smile. The interview wrapped up with a few softer questions about Dawn's career goals and adaptability. As he left the room, he felt a spark of hope. This was the kind of opportunity he had envisioned when he earned his PMP. The engineering firm felt like the right fit, a place where his skills could shine. Days passed, then a week. Dawn checked his email obsessively, refreshing his inbox every few minutes. When the notification finally came, he hesitated before opening it. He braced himself, hoping for the best, but fearing the worst. Dear Mr. Collins, thank you for your interest in the project manager role at Axis Engineering. After careful consideration, the rejection hit like a thunderbolt. Dawn closed his laptop and buried his face in his hands. This wasn't just a setback. It felt like a pattern. 3 interviews, 3 rejections. Each one seemed more promising than the last, yet each ended with the same bitter outcome. His thoughts spiraled. Was his PMP certification a mistake? Had he overestimated its value? Was he missing something fundamental in his interviews? Dawn reached out to his mentor again, desperate for clarity. You're doing everything right, Dawn, the mentor said, but you're up against a competitive market. It's not just about qualifications. It's about chemistry, timing, and sometimes just luck. Don't let this shake you. Each rejection is a step closer to the right opportunity. Dawn wanted to believe those words, but the weight of his failures pressed down on him. That night, he opened his laptop and scrolled through more job postings. His confidence was shaken, but his resolve hadn't crumbled. He applied to roles with renewed vigor, telling himself that one of them had to be the one. As the week ended, Dawn saw a listing for a project coordinator role, less glamorous than his previous targets, but still within reach. It wasn't ideal, but after 3 losses, he was ready to compromise. Little did he know, his next battle would test him in ways he hadn't imagined. Chapter 4. The Coordinator's Conundrum. Dawn sat at his desk, staring at the job listing for a project coordinator position at a mid-sized logistics firm. It wasn't what he had envisioned when he earned his PMP certification, but after 3 rejections, the gleam of idealism had dulled. He convinced himself this could be a stepping stone, a way to build experience, prove his value, and set himself up for future opportunities. The role promised exposure to a variety of projects, albeit with less autonomy than he desired. Still, it was an opportunity, and opportunities were scarce. Don adjusted his resume, swapping out buzzwords for practical examples of how he had facilitated team alignment, handled resource constraints, and mitigated risks. He submitted the application with tempered expectations. A day later, the phone rang. "Hi, this is Julie from Core Logistics. We reviewed your application and would love to schedule an interview." Don's heart raced. The quick turnaround felt like a good sign. The interview was set for the following Tuesday, giving him ample time to prepare. He delved into the logistics industry, learning about supply chains, warehouse management, and transportation trends. By the time the interview day arrived, Don felt as ready as he could be. The office was modest compared to the previous companies he'd visited, but the people seemed friendly. Julie, the HR manager, escorted Don into a small meeting room where the hiring manager, Tom, was waiting. Tom, a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, got straight to the point. "We're looking for someone who can hit the ground running," Tom said. "This role involves juggling multiple projects, dealing with demanding clients, and keeping the team on track. Tell me how you'd manage a situation where a major shipment is delayed and the client is threatening to pull their contract." Don launched into a detailed response, applying the lessons from his PMP studies. He spoke about analyzing the delay's root cause, communicating openly with the client, and proposing a contingency plan. Tom nodded, his expression unreadable. Julie asked a few follow-up questions about teamwork and adaptability, and the interview wrapped up after an hour. As Don left, he felt a flicker of hope. The role wasn't his dream job, but it was a chance to prove himself. Over the next few days, he played the waiting game, checking his email with increasing anxiety. Finally, a message arrived with the subject line, "Follow up, project coordinator position." Don clicked on it, holding his breath. "Thank you for interviewing with Core Logistics. You were a strong candidate, but we've chosen to proceed with another applicant." The rejection felt like a slow unraveling of his confidence. 4 interviews, 4 rejections. Each time, he had come so close, only to fall short. His faith in his PMP certification and his own abilities wavered. Was it worth continuing? He began to feel like an imposter, a pretender in a world where he didn't belong. But giving up wasn't in Don's nature. He reached out to a trusted colleague who had recently transitioned into a new industry. "What am I missing?" he asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "Honestly," his friend replied, "you might be focusing too much on fitting into their boxes. You've got the knowledge, Don, but maybe they're looking for more personality, more creativity. Have you thought about trying a less conventional industry? Something outside your comfort zone?" The idea unsettled him, but it also intrigued him. That night, as Don scrolled through job boards, he stumbled upon a posting from a gaming company seeking a project manager. It was unlike anything he had considered before. The description emphasized creativity, problem-solving, and adaptability, traits Don hadn't prioritized in his other applications. He hesitated but ultimately clicked apply. It felt like a shot in the dark, but something about it reignited his determination. He wasn't ready to give up yet. Little did Don know, this would be the most challenging and transformative interview of his journey. Chapter 5. The Gaming Gambit. Don stared at the email confirmation for his interview with Pixelate Games. It was surreal. He hadn't imagined himself working in the gaming industry, let alone leading projects in a field where creativity and rapid innovation reigned supreme. Still, something about this opportunity felt different. The job description had spoken directly to his growing frustration with rigid structures. It asked for someone who could think beyond traditional solutions and embrace chaos with order. It felt like a challenge, and Don was ready to rise to it. He spent the days leading up to the interview immersed in the gaming world. Daun wasn't much of a gamer, but he dove into the company's portfolio, learning about their recent releases, their target audience, and the trends shaping the industry. He even downloaded one of their best-selling games, fumbling through levels but gaining insight into the experiences they crafted. The interview day arrived, and Daun found himself standing in front of a quirky, unassuming building painted in bold colors. Inside, it was as if he had stepped into another world. Bright murals adorned the walls, and employees zipped around on scooters. One even wore a dragon costume. Daun wasn't sure if it was a joke or part of a project. The panel consisted of 3 people: Samantha, the head of projects; Greg, a senior designer with an infectious grin; and Farah, the HR manager who seemed to be the voice of reason. After the usual introductions, the interview began. At first, the questions seemed normal, even predictable. They asked about his project management experience, his PMP certification, and how he handled team conflicts. Daun drew from his past interviews and leaned on his PMP knowledge, discussing stakeholder engagement and risk management. But as the interview progressed, the tone shifted. Samantha leaned forward with a sly smile. "Daun, imagine you walk into a room. In front of you are 3 cubes, red, green, and blue. Which one do you pick up first, and why?" The question hung in the air, surreal and intimidating. Daun froze. He hadn't prepared for this. It wasn't about metrics or frameworks. It was a test of his creativity, his ability to think on his feet. His mind raced. Did the colors signify something? Was it a psychological test? What if there wasn't a right answer? He cleared his throat. "I'd pick the green cube," he said cautiously, "because green represents growth and opportunity. It's a reminder to me that every problem, no matter how daunting, can lead to progress if you approach it with the right mindset." Samantha raised an eyebrow, and Greg chuckled. "Interesting choice," Samantha said, scribbling something on her notepad. They moved on to the next question, but Daun couldn't shake the feeling that he had blown it. The interview wrapped up with a casual conversation about the gaming industry. "Why pixelate games?" Farah asked. Daun answered honestly, "Because I want to challenge myself. The gaming world is unpredictable and dynamic. It's exactly the kind of environment where I think I could grow and contribute in new ways." As Daun left the office, he couldn't tell if he had nailed the interview or completely embarrassed himself. The question about the cubes haunted him. He replayed his answer over and over in his mind, wondering if he had misunderstood the point. The days that followed were excruciating. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart jumped, only to sink when it wasn't the call. 2 weeks passed without a word. Daun began to spiral. "What did I do wrong this time?" he muttered to himself. He felt like the universe was taunting him, dangling opportunities just out of reach. Then, late one evening, as Daun was preparing to shut down his laptop, his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. He hesitated before answering. "Hi, Daun," a cheerful voice said. "This is Samantha from Pixelate Games. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Daun's breath caught. "No, not at all," he said quickly. "We'd like to offer you the position," Samantha said. "Your interview showed us you're exactly the kind of thinker we need here." For a moment, Daun was speechless. I got the job?" he stammered. "Yes, you did," Samantha replied with a laugh. "Welcome to Pixelate Games, Daun. We're excited to have you on board." As the call ended, Daun sat in stunned silence. He had done it. After countless rejections, frustrations, and self-doubt, he had finally broken through. But this was just the beginning. The world of gaming was unlike anything he had known, and Daun was about to embark on a journey that would test him in ways he never imagined. Chapter 6. The Waiting Game. The initial elation of receiving the job offer slowly gave way to a new sensation: anxiety. Don had spent so long striving to get a job that he hadn't truly considered what it would mean to step into a role as unique as this one. His excitement was tempered by a lingering sense of disbelief. Would he thrive in this new environment? Was this finally the opportunity he had been searching for, or was it just another test waiting to unravel him? Before officially starting, Don found himself in an agonizing 2-week waiting period, while Pixelate Games finalized his onboarding. During this time, his mind became a battleground of hope and doubt. He replayed the cryptic cube question repeatedly, still trying to decipher its deeper meaning. Why had they chosen him? Was it his answer about growth, or something else entirely? Desperate for clarity, Don called his mentor. "Why do you think they hired me?" he asked. "Don," his mentor began, "sometimes it's not just about your answers. It's about your presence. Your ability to step into the unknown and think on your feet is what likely stood out. That's not something everyone can do." The words offered some comfort, but Don couldn't shake the nerves. He used the waiting period to dive deeper into understanding the gaming industry. He watched documentaries, read articles about game development cycles, and even reached out to friends who were gamers to better understand what the end users valued. The more he learned, the more he realized how vast and unpredictable the industry was. As the start date approached, Don received his welcome packet via email. It was unlike anything he had seen before. Instead of the usual corporate jargon, Pixelate Games had created a playful, story-driven onboarding document. Each section was framed as a level he had to complete, with quirky instructions on how to equip himself for success. It was both exciting and intimidating. The packet listed his first major assignment: to oversee a critical stage of development for their upcoming title, a highly anticipated multiplayer game with a tight release schedule. Don's role would involve managing timelines, coordinating between creative and technical teams, and mitigating risks, tasks that felt daunting but also exhilarating. Yet, the waiting dragged on. The closer the start date came, the more Don's nerves spiked. He began to doubt his ability to fit into such an unconventional culture. What if he wasn't creative enough? What if he couldn't bridge the gap between the structured world of project management and the freewheeling chaos of game development? The night before his first day, Don sat at his kitchen table, staring at the Pixelate Games logo on his laptop screen. He thought back to all the rejections, the sleepless nights, and the moments when he had almost given up. This wasn't just another job. It was a culmination of everything he had worked for. He closed his laptop and whispered to himself, "You've got this." As he went to bed, Don resolved that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't let fear hold him back. He was stepping into a world of unknowns, but he carried with him the lessons of resilience and adaptability forged in the crucible of his journey. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Chapter 7. Rising to the Challenge. The morning sun filtered through Don's window as he stood in front of his closet, deliberating over what to wear. His previous roles had taught him to dress sharply, pressed shirts, tailored pants, but he suspected Pixelate Games wouldn't be the kind of place where ties and cufflinks mattered. Instead, he opted for something casual but polished: a button-up shirt, dark jeans, and clean sneakers. As he headed out the door, he felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Walking into Pixelate Games felt like stepping into a completely different universe. The office buzzed with energy. Designers sprawled out on beanbags, furiously sketching ideas on tablets. Programmers huddled over monitors, talking in rapid bursts of technical jargon. The air smelled faintly of coffee and pizza. It was nothing like the sterile environments he had known. Samantha, the head of projects, greeted him with an enthusiastic smile. "Welcome to Level 1, Don," she said, handing him a Pixelate-branded notebook. "Let's get you up to speed." The day began with a whirlwind tour of the office. Dawn met developers, animators, QA testers, and even the in-house sound designer who was recording dragon roars for their new game. Samantha explained that the team was deep into development for their latest project, Dragonfall Chronicles, a highly anticipated multiplayer game slated for release in just 6 months. Your first task, Samantha said, is to bring order to the chaos. We're at a critical point where delays could snowball into disaster. Your PMP skills are exactly what we need. Dawn nodded, though inside he felt a wave of panic. Bringing order to this creative cacophony felt like trying to harness a hurricane. He spent the rest of the day poring over project documents, timelines, and a backlog of pending tasks. It was clear that, while the team was brilliant, their process lacked structure. Deadlines were slipping, resources were misaligned, and communication breakdowns were common. By the second day, Dawn had formulated a plan. He called for a meeting with key stakeholders to align on priorities. As he presented his ideas, a streamlined schedule, clearer communication channels, and risk management strategies, he noticed a mix of reactions. Some team members seemed skeptical, while others looked relieved. Greg, the senior designer from his interview, spoke up. "This sounds great on paper, Dawn, but we're a creative team. We can't just force art to stick to a timeline." Dawn took a breath. He had anticipated resistance. "I get it, Greg," he said. "Creativity needs room to breathe. My goal isn't to stifle that. It's to protect it. If we manage the chaos, you can focus on designing instead of putting out fires." Greg leaned back, crossing his arms, but nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Let's see how it goes." Over the next few weeks, Dawn immersed himself in the work. He discovered the unique challenges of managing a creative team, how ideas could derail timelines, how egos sometimes clashed, and how the iterative nature of game development often led to unforeseen delays. But he also discovered the rewards. When the team hit a milestone, the energy was electric, and when they faced setbacks, their camaraderie kept them going. Dawn learned to adapt his structured approach to the fluidity of the gaming world. He used his PMP training to establish guardrails rather than rigid rules. Stand-up meetings became a forum for collaboration. Risk assessments turned into brainstorming sessions. He built trust by listening to the team, celebrating their wins, and owning his mistakes. One evening, as the office emptied out, Samantha approached him. "You've done good work, Dawn," she said. "This team was a mess a month ago, and now we're back on track. I can see why you stood out in the interview." Dawn smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "Thanks, Samantha. Honestly, I wasn't sure I'd make it through the first week." "Neither were we," she said with a laugh, "but you've proven yourself." As Dawn packed up for the night, he reflected on how far he had come. Each rejection, each doubt-filled night had prepared him for this moment. He wasn't just managing a project. He was thriving in a world that had once seemed unreachable. But he knew the real challenge lay ahead, the final push to bring Dragonfall Chronicles to life. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a mission, and Dawn was ready to see it through to the end. Chapter 8. The Victory Lap. 6 months later, the buzz at Pixelate Games was palpable. The long hours, endless iterations, and moments of near meltdown had all led to this day, the launch of Dragonfall Chronicles. Dawn stood in the bustling conference room with his team, watching as the final build of the game went live on servers worldwide. The room erupted into cheers and applause as the first reviews began to pour in. "Masterful storytelling meets seamless gameplay," one reviewer wrote. Another hailed it as the multiplayer experience of the decade. For Dawn, the accolades weren't just validation of the game. It was validation of his journey. But the road to this moment had been anything but smooth. A month earlier, the project hit a near-catastrophic roadblock. During the final QA testing phase, a major bug was discovered that caused the game to crash during multiplayer sessions. It was the kind of issue that could delay the release by weeks, if not months. The team was in crisis mode, tempers flaring and exhaustion setting in. Samantha had pulled Dawn aside. "This is make or break," she said. "We need a miracle." Dawn didn't believe in miracles, but he did believe in his team. He gathered the key players, developers, QA testers, designers, and even the sound engineer, and facilitated an intense, no-blame brainstorming session. They tackled the problem systematically, dissecting the issue, assigning tasks, and agreeing on a round-the-clock schedule. "It's not about perfection," Dawn told them. "It's about progress. We solve this one step at a time." For 2 weeks, Dawn barely left the office. He coordinated shifts, kept stakeholders updated, and brought in extra resources when the team hit bottlenecks. He also made sure the team didn't burn out, ordering late-night pizzas and sneaking in moments of levity when tensions ran high. Slowly but surely, the bug was fixed. The game was back on schedule. Standing in the conference room on launch day, Dawn couldn't help but think back to the beginning of his journey. The pharmaceutical job he didn't get, the hotel that chose someone else, the engineering firm's polite rejection. Every single no had led him here, to this moment of triumph. Samantha clinked a glass to get everyone's attention. "I want to take a moment to thank Dawn," she said, smiling. "When he joined us, we were, let's just say, a bit of a mess. But he brought structure, calm, and honestly, a sense of fun to this team. Dawn, we couldn't have done this without you." The room burst into applause, and Dawn felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of recognition, but it felt earned. For once, he didn't feel like an outsider trying to prove himself. He felt like he belonged. Later that evening, as the team celebrated with drinks and laughter, Dawn slipped away to the quiet rooftop. The city lights stretched out before him, a reminder of how far he had come. He thought about the rejection emails, the sleepless nights, and the moments when he had almost given up. Every setback had been a lesson. Every failure had been fuel. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his mentor. "Congrats on the launch. Told you persistence pays off." Dawn smiled and typed back, "You were right. It was all worth it." As he leaned against the railing, he realized that this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a new story. Dawn wasn't defined by the setbacks or the rejections. He was defined by how he had risen above them. And now, he was ready for whatever came next. The game was live, his team was thriving, and Dawn had finally found his place. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. This was his victory lap, but he knew there were more races to run, more challenges to conquer, and Dawn was ready.